Hey, what's up YouTube? Yes, finally, I am back. And I know this video is way overdue, so let's jump into it. This is the little Shanling M2s, as you can see by the size of my hand. It's a very, very compact little device. If we just switch this on, we'll get that going. So, what we have is a very modern design. A little control wheel to the side, back button over here. While this control knob does act as your up and down kind of control as well as volume, and we can see here it's changing the volume. Pressing it in is also your OK or selection button. On the side we have some hardware keys here for skipping back or skipping up on a list. We've got the play pause over here, and we've also got the skip forward or fast forward button, as well as skipping down the list, and I'll show a little nifty trick with that in the UI a bit later on. On the back we've also got a glass, and you can see, of course, being a glass thing, and this is all fingerprint magnet. I do have some 3M dual lock on here, and I'll show you in a little bit why I've done that. Here we've got the single card slot. A bit of a pity that we don't have dual card slots, but again we'll get into that a bit later. We've got a USB-C connection over here, and the headphone out, which also is the line out connection. And on the top we have the power button. So as you can see, it's a very elegant looking little device. We do have a couple of colors that this comes in. Recently they've introduced a red color, which looks super sweet, and I have seen on their website that they've got sort of a lime green metallic kind of color, which also looks pretty sweet, but I'm not sure on availability of that. And of course we've got this black one, then we've got also like a bluish purplish kind of color, and I do believe I've also seen a silverish stainless steel kind of color as well. So yes, a very compact little device, very nicely designed. Of all the, I'd say, mini DAPs, this is probably my favorite design overall, if I'm perfectly honest. Okay, so let me compare the dimensions of this to the AP60 and the FiO X1 second generation. Okay, so there we've got the X1 second generation and the AP60. Now I know on camera these two devices are showing a lot of reflection. I do apologize for that. It's time that I invest in a circular polarizing filter to get rid of that glare. Okay, so dimension wise, the M2s has a width of 53 millimeters, a depth of 14.5 millimeters, and an overall length of 85.6 millimeters. Whereas the AP60 has a width of 42 millimeters, a depth of 14 millimeters, and a total length overall, excluding this little bit over here, of 70 millimeters. So it is a little bit smaller than that, although technically by volume the M2s is about 60% bigger than the AP60. The X1 second generation, on the other hand, has a width of 55.5 millimeters, a depth of 12 millimeters, and an overall length of 97 millimeters. So interestingly enough, even though the X1 second generation looks bigger, it's actually the M2s that's about 2% bigger than the X1 second generation. But as you can see, of course, it does look a lot more compact, and it's just that little bit of extra depth that gives the M2s the overall bigger device. But as you can see, it's very, if I put my hands there, I mean, these are very small devices indeed, very compact devices. Okay, so yes, as I said, glass front and back, very nice design. So let's have a look at the UI quickly and just show you how these buttons work. Now, this is where I have one small problem with this device. Not so much a problem, but more of a preference. This dial over here, this control knob, as you can see, if I twist it towards me, that moves the selection downwards, and moving it up moves the selection upwards, which is fine because this is something that I've gotten used to. However, I didn't find that very intuitive, if I'm perfectly honest, in the beginning, because twisting this up, right, that means that I'm twisting it, if I hold it this way, clockwise. Now, the reason I had a problem with this is I'm used to watches, right? So if I want to adjust the time and I want to move the hands clockwise, well, you pull out the crown and you turn the crown clockwise. Whereas with this, if I turn clockwise, it goes the opposite direction. So that's where I had a little bit of a learning curve in the beginning. But you know what? This is something that I did mention, well, on HeadFi, not directly to Shanling, but that I did mention on HeadFi, and Shanling did say, yeah, but they did this on purpose because, you know, you twist it towards you to move down, and I suppose that makes sense. It just didn't feel very intuitive in the beginning. Now, something I do want to show you about the UI. These two have very, very similar UIs. You can see here, the first icon on the X1 second generation is, we can see up here, is now playing, right? Oh, let me just go back to the home. Okay, which is the same here. Moving to the next one is category, which, you know, for this device is just labeled differently, but it's the same thing. My music. This is where you can browse through your music library via the tags. So if you've got your tags properly set up, then you can browse by artist, browse by album, etc., etc. Okay, so the next one is file browser. Okay, browse files. Same thing on the Fire. Next one is play settings. Over here, play settings. Next one, system settings and system settings. Now, if we just go into system settings quick, the rest of the stuff is all pretty much in the same order. So we have Bluetooth and Bluetooth settings, backlight, idle standby. So not everything's in the same order per se, but the layout of your menu items are pretty much identical between the two. Now, the reason I mention this is because the Shanling has a far more modern looking and feeling device. And that just comes down to how the things look, right? And the layout of everything. Essentially, the UI navigation is identical between the two. But because this one uses a bit more of a modern look, more of a modern layout and everything, this just feels like a superior device. And I'm so glad that this is something that Shanling understands, and this is something that they implemented in this device, because it honestly adds so much value to this device to just have something that doesn't feel, dare I say, chi-fi, if that makes sense. It feels more like a westernized device, you know, where we pay attention to and we invest time in a UI and make it something that people will enjoy using. That is something that's very close to my heart. It's a bit of a pet peeve for me, especially when it comes to Fire, because they've been using the same, or so it seems at least, for the X1, the X1 second generation, the first X5, the second X5, and the X3 second generation. They've used the same well, it seems like the same firmware, or at least the exact same UI look and feel layout for all those devices, right? Now, the reason it's a pet peeve for me is because when I had the first X5, Fire were very nice enough to give us the tools to unpack and extract the firmware so that we can design our own themes. Okay, so the reason I mention is because it was great for many of us to get involved in making themes. My most successful theme, and I had a look the other day and I had a couple of thousand downloads on this, was Modern Simplicity, which essentially I did just what Shanling have done with this theme. Not so much showing the album art here, because that was impossible to do, but just using more modern icons. In fact, with the Fire, we were so limited, you couldn't even change the color of the text. So again, I know I'm rambling on about this for a while now. The reason I mention this is because we were involved in it, and I know it took many of us, and we didn't do this as a job, obviously, it was just as a hobby. It took us about a week or so to create a theme. Now keep that in mind, that period of time, a week, to create a theme for someone who's doing it as a hobby, right? If FIO gave a damn about their devices, right, and the look, and if they understood how important the UI is to the user and how it affects a person's perception of a device, I mean, really, take a week. How much manpower do they have? Someone who does it as a job. Get someone to update your damn UI. Make your devices look and feel more modern. We've been saying this for at least 2 or 3 years, and for whatever reason they don't listen. And this device right here proves that, you know what, UI is very, very important, and it makes a huge difference to how a device feels. The M2s isn't perfect. What you can see here is when I turn this dial here, okay, there it skipped 1 position, and there it skips 2 positions. So within a turn, it does have tactile feedback. There is a little click. Okay, I don't know if this is something that Shanling can fix within a firmware update, but rotating this, okay, there was 1 click and it moved 1 position. That's perfectly fine. But moving it again, I'm only about halfway between 2 clicks, right? And it's jumped 1 position. So when I go to the next click, then it's jumped to another position. So, you know, ideally you would want 1 click on the wheel to correspond to being 1 position moved on the screen. That's intuitive, right? I don't know if that is something that Shanling can fix in a firmware. Hopefully it is something that they can address, because if they do, that'll be great. Another fantastic feature of this device is, well, not so much a feature, but the screen. This device has the highest resolution screen on any DAP, and that includes the $3,500 Kern Ultima. That's pretty crazy, right? I mean, this display is only a few points behind the iPhone 7, if I remember correctly. So it's a very, very good device. It's crisp. It's not very bright. So, you know, slight issues when you look at the screen in direct sunlight, but you know, it's a very, very crisp screen, and it makes the device feel more well, modern, because I mean, let's face it, with our mobile phones we are going to higher and higher resolution screens, so it does make it feel more modern, but it makes it feel more premium. It makes it feel like a more complete device. Not that it doesn't feel like the display was an afterthought kind of thing. It feels like it was engineered and it was included in the design, and it makes the device feel nicer. Okay, so we've had a talk about the physical buttons. Now I want to show you something else about the dimensions, which is really, really cool about this device. Here we have the FIO A3. As you can see, they share very, very similar dimensions. And on this side, that's where I've got the other side of the 3M dual lock. So when I click these in together, let's put it that way around. And look at that. That is a really, really cool little stack. Now, the reason I did this is not it's not a case of the M2s not having enough power or anything like that to drive headphones. I mean, the only IEMs that I drive with them are the FiO F9s, also fantastic IEMs. I'll be reviewing those soon. So stacking these two together, I mean, that's just an awesome little stack, isn't it? And okay, so the reason I did this was because this bypasses the internal amp of the M2s, of course. So that does mean that you get a little bit of extra runtime out of this device, and also you've got, you know, access to a quick little bass boost, which is kind of cool. The other thing that I love about this little stack is, if I just get this over, this is the FiO HB1 waterproof case, and this is just so cool for traveling because these devices just fit so perfectly into that case. I mean, how neat is that? Isn't that just cool? Okay, now another little stack that is very, very popular is, and I haven't stacked it like this because I do not own this device, but it is a very popular little stack, and you can see like that shows up pretty cool. And I mean, that is a fantastic, genuinely hi-fi sound stack, and it's very compact, which is very cool. And in fact, Shanling actually makes a USB-C to micro USB cable, kind of specifically for this reason. So that's really, really cool. Okay, so we've had a look at the UI, we've had a look at the hardware buttons. Oh, the other thing that I need to mention about the UI is this thing is fast. It is very, very, it just feels very, very modern. In the previous video where I reviewed the X3 Mark III, I did show the difference in Bluetooth connection speed, and I mean, this thing just won by a mile. Updating the media library is also very, very fast on this device. I think it was, if I remember correctly, a 200 gig card filled up with a couple of thousand FLAC files and MP3 files. Took around, if I remember correctly, 3 minutes or so to update the library, which was just a lot faster than the FiO. Also, when you fast forward and rewind within a track, I mean, the moment you let go of that button, it plays from that position. It's just very, very responsive. It's a very refined UI. It's been optimized for this device, which is fantastic to see. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the features of this device. As mentioned, Bluetooth is included, very, very responsive. It does have aptX as well, which is great. The other nice feature about this is that it has two-way Bluetooth connection. So let's say, for example, you have a subscription to Tidal or Spotify, something like that. Obviously, this DAP does not run Android, so you won't be able to use those apps on this, but you can connect this via Bluetooth to your mobile device where you can install the app, and then stream your your Spotify or Tidal streaming from your mobile device to this and have your headphones plugged into this. It's not ideal, no, but you know what? It's kind of cool nonetheless, right? You can also use it as a USB DAC, so again, you can connect this to your mobile phone, all right? So in that case, you can have a high quality streaming like Tidal or Spotify, and via USB have it go into here and have this decode the sound for you. Fantastic. However, probably the best feature, not the best, but a really, really cool feature is HibiLink. Essentially what this means is this device does not have a touchscreen, obviously, but this is sort of giving it a touchscreen interface. So you can have your headphones plugged into this, and you can have your M2s just stuck in your pocket, and then use your phone to select a different track, or to skip tracks, or to change volume, or I mean, it's a really innovative feature from Shanling to include this. So I can go over and select a different song. You'll see now that it updates there, and you can see that it's got the album art going there. Now, of course, over here it's not going to show the album art because, I mean, that's going to be a lot of stuff for it to load. I don't know if there's some sort of hardware limitation why it can't do that, or if they just intentionally did it to just not have to take a lot of resources to load it, which makes sense. But you do see that whenever a song is playing here, it does show the album art over here. So that's pretty cool. Okay, so we've had a look at some of the features now, and the design and the UI. So let's talk a little bit about the sound. To be perfectly honest, this device actually surprised me a little bit, because for something this size, this compact, and being a only $200 device, it actually sounds really, really good. Unfortunately, I can't compare it to the N3, right? Because I've only spent some time with the N3, about 5 minutes or so. I don't think that's enough to actually make a concrete comparison between the two. But of course, in my previous video of the X3 third generation, I did compare them, and I think the X3 sounds a little bit better. But you know, it's more of a, I think it's more of a sound preference rather than an outright sound quality. So this device does sound very, very good for such a small compact device, and I prefer its sound connected to the A3 amplifier. It is quite a neutral, fairly neutral sound, but it's not overly cold. You know, it doesn't sound, sometimes if a device just tries to be too pedantically analytical, you know, it feels more like a chore to listen to the device. It feels like you're forced to deal with every single tiny little flaw in a track, and it just becomes a chore. It becomes work to listen to that device. Whereas, you know, you're listening to music, you want to enjoy the music, and this device is very, very good for that. The stage width, it's not very wide, but it's acceptable for, you know, being a tiny little $200 device. It's a very, very good little DAP. But I don't think that's where the value for this device lies. The value for this device is in how it stacks with, for example, the A3, an external amp, or how it stacks with the Mojo, or, for example, my iFi IDST Black Label. It's a fantastic device as a source as well. So it's very competent as a standalone device, and it's exceptionally competent as a source device, or as a transport, as some might call it. And I think that's where most of the value for this device lies. It's very well designed, it feels premium, it's very compact, it's got fantastic UI, it sounds very, very decent on its own, and it's a fantastic little transport. Now, unfortunately, it does obviously have its limits. It would have been nice if it had dual card slots, you know, but storage is becoming cheaper, so, you know, maybe it's not such a big deal. But it would have been cool for such a small device to have dual card slots, because I mean, that would just pretty much make it the perfect transport. But the fantastic screen and everything, I mean, this is just it's such a good device, such a good. Shanling definitely just knocked that out of the park, and anybody who is in the DAP business, I mean, this is strong competition, such strong competition. And you know, the likes of FiO better watch the backs, so to speak. I mean, this is the level of work that could potentially ruin such a company if they don't start paying more attention and putting in more effort in their own devices, especially their UI. So that is my review of the M2s. As I said, fantastic little device. I mean, $200, it's so close to being perfect. It's got its little niggles, it's got its little disadvantages, but you know what, Shanling did such a good job. It's those little flaws, so to speak, not really flaws, but perhaps maybe shortcomings is more appropriate. Those little shortcomings are well forgiven for how this device performs and what it brings to the table. So I hope you guys enjoyed the review. If you have any questions, please post them down below. And if you like the video, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, because I mean, obviously that's very important to myself. And I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.